Anthuriums like to be kept moist, but they don't like to stand in any water. So every time that you give your plant water, always make sure that you empty out your cover pot or your drip tray. Because if you allow your plant to stand in the water, the media will become waterlogged. There will be no more oxygen in the media, and it will kill off the roots of your plant. Additionally, if you remove your plant from the pot and you smell the root ball, if there's a funny decaying smell, it's most possibly root rot. So if your plant does have root rot, you want to take it out of the pot. You want to remove as much of the affected media as possible and cut back any dead roots. Then you want to either spray your plant with a solution of hydrogen peroxide. You can even perhaps use alcohol to really kill off any of the mold spores amongst the roots of your plant. Then you want to plant your plant into fresh growing media, possibly into a smaller pot to accommodate the reduction in roots. Because if you plant your plant into the same pot where how your plant has possibly lost a third of its roots, it can make the problem more acute, because now what's going to happen is the pot will hold on to too much growing media, which will in turn hold on to too much moisture. So, generally anthuriums need to be repotted about once every 2 years into a pot that's slightly bigger than the pot it is currently in. So the most important thing to consider when deciding to repot your anthurium is what potting mix are you going to use. I will put a link up to a video I did where I mixed up my potting media, which should go a long way to help you to mix up yours. You want a mix that is well draining, that has plenty of perlite in it, things to really augment the aeration of the mix. Because anthuriums love to have lots of air around their roots, they like a nice fluffy loamy mix with plenty of perlite, bark. You can even put some pebbles in there. I know people who also mix in the what's it called, the things that you use in the balls you use in hydro. I can't think of the name now. I'll put it up on the screen. You want to really mix in things to really give you that aeration. Because we all know the quickest way to kill an anthurium is to plant it up into compacted, water retentive media. The next thing to consider when deciding to repot your anthurium is the pot size. So as a general rule of thumb, you only want to go 1 or 2 sizes up in the pot size than the pot that your plant is currently in. If you overpot your plant, it can lead to issues like root rot, because there will be a lot of media in the pot which will hold on to too much moisture for a long period of time, which could kill off the roots of your plant. So usually I only go up 1 or 2 sizes with my pot size when I decide to repot my anthuriums. Then you have to decide between if you are going to use a plastic pot or a clay pot. So with the clay pot, what you have to consider is that clay has a tendency to wick away water from the growing media, because clay is a porous substance, so evaporation takes place through the sides of the pots. So you'll often find that plants in clay pots will dry out. Repotting is important because in plants that are severely pot bound, you'll often see that the growth becomes stunted, and if you try to water your plant, you're likely to see the water run off the sides, because at a certain point the growing media almost becomes like cork. It almost repels moisture, which is not really good for your plant, and that's why repotting your Anthurium at appropriate times is good and necessary for the ultimate health of your plant. So when you repot your plant, you want to take your plant out of its current container, place it in the middle of like the hex pot, perhaps put some of the media at the bottom of the pot and place your plant on top, and then you want to fill in around the root ball of your plant with the new growing media, making sure to press out any air pockets. Then after you've filled up the pot, I always like to give my plants just a little bit of moisture to help settle the roots. And yeah, it's as quick as that. So before I start, I just want to say that this is a bit of a loaded question, because watering will depend greatly on the variables in your specific growing conditions. So if I use myself as an example, I have an east-facing apartment. All the windows is face east, so that's morning sun, and in summer it's morning to afternoon sun, mid-afternoon, about 1 o'clock, and then the sun is gone. Now, that does mean though that the apartment has a tendency to really heat up. So that's just point number one, the temperature. As I mentioned, it is an east-facing apartment, so there is a lot of light also coming into the apartment, especially in the earliest part of the day. And what was my third thing? Okay, let's first talk about those two things. So, in higher temperatures, plants tend to transpire more, meaning that they take up moisture from the soil to replace the water that's being lost through their leaves. This is also the case in higher light situations, because the plant is now photosynthesizing more, and ergo uses more water from the media. So on those two things, I water my plants, or my Anthurium specifically, about once a week. So that's just point number one. Now we need to talk about pots and pot size, because that's also something that's going to influence the frequency of how much you water your Anthurium. So this plant is in the nursery pot. It still comes in. You can see this is quite a small pot for this plant. This is what you normally buy these plants in. I would not say that this plant is pot bound yet, but it's quickly going on the way to becoming pot bound. But as you can see, smaller pots, and this plant would also have grown into a fair amount of the growing medium in this pot. So now that tells you that there's not a lot of moisture holding capacity left in the growing media. So just from a practical point of view, there's not a lot of growing media in here to start with. So those are also things that will affect how quickly water is lost from this growing media. Now, the other thing to consider is the pot. Now, this is a plastic pot, and as I've said many times on my channel, plastic pots are great because they don't allow evaporation through the sides of the pot, only through the top. Now, if this plant was planted in a clay terracotta pot, it would be a whole different story because clay is a porous material. It also has the effect of wicking water away from the soil. So in a clay pot, you'll also have a drying through the sides of the pots. Because if you've ever planted plants in a terracotta pot, you'll always notice when you water your plants, the pot becomes like darker at the sides, and that's the pot absorbing water. So those are just the things to think about. So if you, for example, live in, perhaps you have an apartment that does not get any direct sunlight, it would probably mean that your temperatures are cooler. It might mean that your plant is not photosynthesizing as much. So your plant might not need as much water. So that's something, you know, to consider. It might also depend on your climate. I live in a very hot climate, so and especially in this apartment, there's not that much difference between my summer and winter temperatures because of the direction the apartment has. But if I was maybe living in Europe and had colder winters with shorter day lengths, because that's also important to consider, because in a shorter day length also your plant would not photosynthesize as much because there just wouldn't be the same amount of hours in the day as in summer. So that's all something to think about. And also in the winter, if you're in colder climate, in like the northern hemisphere, you are most probably going to have heating in your house, you know, underfloor heating, central heating, which is going to also push up the temperature. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that because it's cold outside, your plants might not require any water. You know, it's the inside temperatures that have an effect on your plant. Now we can talk about the amount. So if I'm going to water this plant in the spot, I'm going to apply water across the top of the soil until, you know, it's like after a while you get a feeling for that. You apply water just a little bit and that's it. And then afterwards I will pull the plant out and empty out any water that has collected in the bottom. Alternatively, of course, I can take my plant out of this cover pot and place it in the sink, open the tap, allow the water to run through. Now, both of these have their merits. The first one, of course, if you are in a hurry and you don't have a lot of time, it's nice and easy to just give a little bit of water and there you go. The risk, of course, with that is that you can forget to empty out the pot and you can have water collecting in the bottom of the pot, which would influence your plant's roots, which could lead to root rot. Now, the second option, to rinse your plant, has the benefit that you are then sure that your plant was given a nice, thorough watering. And if you leave it on the side of the sink, you know that your plant, that all the water has run off, and you can place your plant back in its position at a later time. So those are the two things to consider. So anthuriums are really easy to propagate with higher stem cuttings because they produce aerial roots on their stems quite readily. So if you want to propagate through stem cuttings, you will have to find a suitable part of the plant with some nodes on it. You can detach this from the main plant by using a pair of sharp secateurs or scissors. And you want to ensure that the piece that you cut off has some aerial roots on it. When you've cut off the piece, you can either place it in perlite, directly in soil, or use water propagation. Personally, I like using water propagation because I like to monitor the roots of the plant. And here I have a piece I cut off a while ago, and you can see what I mean. So the aerial roots on the stem has started to grow, and this plant is potentially ready to pot up into a new home. When using water propagation to propagate your anthuriums, always make sure that you empty out the water at least once a week. And this helps to keep the water fresh, and also helps to replenish the oxygen in the water, which will encourage your roots to grow. Always make sure that you take off any sheaths or dying leaves that's in the water, because as they decay, they really take out all the oxygen from the water, and that could lead to your cutting possibly failing. I've been growing anthuriums for many years, and in my experience, the best place for an anthurium is behind a shaded windowsill with either sheer or muslin curtains, and the plant receiving that gentle sun throughout the day. The great thing about those types of curtains is that they block the harshness of the sun, and your plant can really get all the light it needs in order to produce flowers. So if your plant is perhaps in a darker spot, try perhaps moving it into a brighter spot, but remember to do so gradually. Even morning sun can scorch the leaves of a plant that's not accustomed to it. So, gentle steps. Anthuriums do require brighter light than, for example, peace lilies, who can produce flowers in more diminished light. So it has a lot to do with how they grow in nature, where peace lilies will tend to grow on the forest floor, usually close to water sources. And anthuriums are often found in trees as epiphytes, on rocks as lithophytes, where they get more sunlight. The second reason that your anthurium might not be flowering could be due to not getting any fertilizer. Like all flowering plants, anthuriums do need some fertilizer in order to produce these magnificent spathes. So what you want to do is you want to either apply a weak orchid fertilizer, something with potassium to really encourage your plant to flower, and hydrogen fertilizer might only encourage leaf growth. But I think any type of fertilizer is better than no fertilizer. Of course, the ideal fertilizer would be something organic, something natural, like kelp or worm castings, something that's going to be soft on the roots of your plant, but still provide it with the adequate nutrients that it needs. So in my experience, anthurium flowers turning brown has 3 possible causes. So the first one is severe drought stress. Then the second one is over fertilization, and the third one is sunburn. And I want to add on to that that sometimes the browning of the flowers can also just be natural if it's the older flowers. So if you know what I mean. So if the older flowers are turning brown, it could be a natural thing, and that's fine. But if it's the younger flowers, it could be one of those three things I just mentioned. So let's talk about drought stress. Well, in the case of the browning, it's probably severe drought stress. So if a Anthurium is very dry, what the plant will often do as a defense against the drought stress is it will almost kind of pull back resources, to its core. And that's why you'll often then see the older leaves start to fall off. And in the case of the flowers, the flowers will start to go, because flowers actually take quite a bit of energy from a plant. And when a plant goes into a type of survival mode, it will often first throw off its flowers. You also sometimes see this with fruit trees, where if there's a drought and they are setting their fruit, they'll often just sort of throw all their unripened fruit off. And it's a way for the plant to protect itself. So in the case of Anthuriums, when we see that immediate browning, and it's like partnered with your plant being very dry, it could be a case of your plant is trying to conserve its resources and its energy. If the drying goes on for a prolonged period, you'll then also see that your plant, the leaves will start to go. Young leaves will just die off before even opening up, and then eventually a plant will die if it does not get adequate moisture at the roots. So over-fertilization can also cause your flowers to go brown. It's similar to what happens with leaves. So I know on one of my previous Anthuriums, I used those little plant fertilizer sticks on quite a small pot. And within a week, you could see the leaf would start, a side of it will start to go brown, and then it will just kind of go out in this ring shape until the entire leaf, turned brown and just fell off. So that's why, since that happened, I've just stopped using those sticks. With fertilizer, if you suspect that it is over-fertilization, the best thing you can do is to flush out the pot. So at a sink, you can just open the tap and let the water flow through the potting media, coming out the drainage holes. And if you do that periodically over a period of time, it should flush out the majority of the excess fertilizer that is causing the problem. So the last thing on this list is, of course, sunburn. So if you take a plant and you place it in direct sunlight, you'll often see the light burn on it. It can also affect the flowers. And if you suspect it is light burn, the first clue will be that your plant is standing in direct sunlight. Also, light burn will often come from above, so it means that the top parts of the spathe or the leaves are likely to be affected first. So if you see that your plant is in direct sunlight or was in direct sunlight, sometimes if I'm busy cleaning up in the house, I'll move my plants around, and then without thinking, I'll place it in a spot with direct sunlight and clean, and not think about the plant standard, and then I'll move it back. But sometimes just being in that direct sunlight for half an hour to an hour is enough to do some serious cell damage to your plant if the plant is not acclimated to direct sunlight. So that's just something to watch out for, because sometimes it will only pop up later. You'll see that the edges start to go and get brown. There's a simple trick we can follow to ensure that we get as much of the excess moisture away from the root ball of our plant. So what you're going to need for this is some kitchen paper or kitchen towel, whichever way you want to refer to it. And this is my Anthurium plant, which is dripping, which has been overwatered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take two sheets of this, put it down, and take my plant out of its spot. And then I'm going to, there's still more water dripping out, and place it on the sheet. And then we're going to take a couple and just place it around the root ball. And if you press it against the root ball, it should stick to the root ball, because it will start to take up moisture from the root ball, from the soil in the root ball. If it becomes very wet, like you can see here, you can simply add some more sheets and just put it around, because there's a point at which this will absorb as much water as it can. So you want to apply more and more around the root ball to really get as much of the water absorbed. And now what I'm actually going to do is place another 2 sheets underneath to really help and get the moisture removed from the soil of my plant. I can really feel how soaking wet this is. So it's really taking up a lot of water away from the root ball of my plant. And so you can repeat this process until there's enough moisture wicked away from the root ball and you feel satisfied to put your plant back in its spot. So if you notice that your Anthurium flowers are gradually starting to turn green, it could actually be a natural part of the aging process of your plant. Anthuriums generally keep their color for about 4 to 6 weeks. And after this time, you can notice like green start to form on the outer edges of the flower and gradually move inwards. But the flower still looks absolutely fine. This could be a sign that your plant's flowering is coming to an end, and it's a completely natural process. So the greening of the flowers is a natural part of the aging process of your plant, but it can also be because of the greenhouse practices that the grower or breeder use. So many growers force their Anthuriums to come into flower when the plants essentially are not ready to flower. This is why you have a supply of Anthuriums in flower throughout the year. And what they do is they use special hormones sprayed on the plant, and this is why when you look at a plant, even the smallest plant produces a flower, which would not naturally be the case with a plant, grown at home. And this is because they use these hormones. Now, the side effect of this could be that once your plant leaves this perfect environment, with temperature, humidity, light, fertilizer, everything, and comes home with you, often in not such ideal conditions, and normally reduced light, etc., reduced humidity, the aging process could start, faster, so your plant can start really because it's out of the ideal environment, the flowers start to fade and your plant comes to the end of its blooming cycle. So I know it could be an issue for some people. For me, it's not really an issue because I know from experience that with anthuriums, when you bring your plant home and if you place it in the right spot, you could have a plant that's in flower continuously. So if the first flush of flowers, if they go after I bring my plant home, it's fine because I know that the plant will reflower in due time. I've also noticed that the bicolor flowers, so the ones that have white and pink or stripy, they have a tendency to go greener a lot sooner than, for example, the red ones. And I think I've also noticed that the white ones, they also have a tendency to go greener sooner than the red ones. But, I think it's a natural part of how the flowers age. So this is my plant. There are multiple plants in the same pot, so I thought it might be a good time to divide this plant and in that way obviously propagate my anthurium. So the first thing I'm going to do is to just gently squeeze on the pot to loosen the plant and to detach any roots from the sides of the pot. So now I'm going to take this out, and you can see that this plant has a very healthy root system. Just going to move this out of the way. So what I'm going to just do is I'm going to loosen some of the soil from the roots. And just take out the soil, and now I'm going to see where I can break my plant. So if you look at this here, there's a natural division between these two parts of the plant. So I'm just going to pull away at it, and I think that broke through the stem. You might have to break some of the roots also in this process. So the two plants are divided from each other. It's just the entanglement of the roots that are presenting a challenge. And I think we're nearly there actually. There we go. So now I have two plants. Just going to remove this leaf that broke off. And I'm actually going to repot this into the same, or pot this up into the same pot. As you can see, this is actually an ideal pot size because it can take the roots quite comfortably, and the plant is not over potted, which is really important. And now what I'll do is I'm going to fill in around the roots with my new potting soil. This is a mixture of cocoa coir, perlite, milled orchid bark, and worm castings. I will put a link up on the screen to the video where I mix up my own potting media. So make sure to check that out if you have any doubts about the appropriate potting soil to use on your plants. And just push down to get rid of all the air pockets that would have, would be between the different roots of your plant. Just shake it down to make sure that the media goes into all the air pockets. Just one thing to also note is that you don't want to pot your plant too deep. You want the soil to be at precisely the same level as it was previously. And there you go. So we can just actually pop this plant back into here. I will give this a little drink of water also to help settle the roots and to help the plant to overcome the stress from being pulled apart and propagated. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next video. Bye.